The clink of ceramic cups and the low hum of early conversations filled the Beacon Diner, a timeless little place where memories gathered like dust in corners. No one swept anymore. In the farthest booth by the window, an old man sat alone. A weathered bomber jacket hung on his narrow frame, and atop his head rested a faded green cap, its only feature a forgotten air squadron insignia, long out of circulation. He never spoke much, always ordered the same, black coffee with no sugar and 2 poached eggs. Locals called him Gramps, some affectionately, others dismissively, but he never corrected them. He merely nodded in acknowledgement, as if to say that names no longer mattered. Later that day, as he stepped out into the slow rhythm of the town, a group of teenagers crossed the street. One of them pointed at the cap, smirking. "Hey, Gramps," Top Gun called. "They want their hat back." Laughter followed, casual and cutting. The old man didn't flinch. He tipped his cap and continued walking, every step deliberate, his limp steady but dignified. He walked the same route every day, ending at the forgotten war memorial near the abandoned airstrip. There, he sat on a weathered bench, faced east and watched the sky. Years ago, decades even, he had sat in a different room, younger, sharper, silent among men with eyes like his. A commanding officer drew arrows on a chalkboard filled with flight patterns and code names. "Operation Emberlight," the officer had said. "You're ghosts until I say otherwise." And so, ghosts they became. Back in the present, 2 children on bicycles watched him from across the gravel path. One squinted, curious. "He's always there, every Thursday, just sits." "Think he's crazy?" "My dad says he was Air Force, back when jets still had dials and switches." They rode off, trailing dust behind them. Across town, in a quiet room inside the Veterans Center, Nurse Paula shuffled through folders. A new envelope sat on her desk, unmarked save for a return address, Carter Ridge. Inside was a photograph. 8 men in flight suits stood in front of a matte gray aircraft. The old man was at the center, his expression unreadable. But what caught Paula's eye wasn't the faces, it was the patch stitched on their shoulders, a winged blade inside a dark triangle. She'd seen that once, buried deep in a forgotten file labeled Restricted Air Command Unit 9B. She tucked the photo away with a shiver. Meanwhile, at the local barbershop, a conversation unfolded with the familiarity of tradition. The barber, an old-timer himself, adjusted his razor and spoke without looking up. "He comes in once a month, same haircut, never says a word, tips exact change." "And that cap?" a customer asked. "Never takes it off. Not once. I asked him about it once, jokingly. He smiled and said, 'It's not for fashion, it's for memory.'" At Town Hall, an assistant reviewed the day's schedule. One appointment stood out. James K., Veterans Inquiry, Room 2B. It had been set by mail, through a system no one had accessed in years. The mayor shrugged when asked. No one really knew who James K. was. The meeting would never happen. Friday morning arrived with bright skies and the buzz of anticipation. The town's annual Veterans Appreciation flyover drew families, school children, and officials to the old memorial field. A brass band played while flags fluttered in the breeze. At the edge of the crowd, the old man stood at his usual place, back straight, eyes locked skyward. "Why does he stand like that?" someone whispered. "Like what?" "Like he's waiting for orders." At the nearby airbase, 4 fighter jets sat ready. Inside the control tower, final checks were completed. Airspace clear, ceremonial route confirmed, execute formation Alpha. The jets rose into the air in perfect harmony. But then, Something unexpected occurred. The lead aircraft broke from formation, followed by another and another, until they began to realign, not in the ceremonial diamond, but in a missing man formation. Gasps echoed from the crowd below. The formation lowered, shifting deliberately toward the eastern edge of the field, precisely over the spot where the old man stood. As they passed overhead, each jet tilted its wings, an unmistakable silent signal used only between elite pilots. He raised his hand to the brim of his cap, holding it firm until the roar faded into silence. From a reserve tent near the runway, several pilots began emerging, still in flight suits. They walked slowly, solemnly, until they formed a line facing the memorial. One by one, they raised their hands in a salute, not to the flag, not to the crowd, but to the old man. Whispers swept through the field like a storm. Who is he? Why are they saluting him? What's going on? A woman, elderly and hunched, began to cry softly. That's James Kellan, she whispered. He flew recon in '76, Operation Emberlight. They said he vanished. Hours later, at the Regional Air Force Records Department, a technician pulled an aging file. Kellan, James E. The folder was stamped multiple times, classified, formerly MIA. A handwritten note read, survived, walked out alone, never asked for medals. A second note, newer, reclassified living archive. That evening, James walked his usual path back through town. For the first time in years, people noticed. Some nodded, a few saluted. None of them spoke. They didn't need to. And the old man kept walking, just like always. By the next morning, the photo had already spread to 3 veteran forums online. It showed the precise moment 12 pilots stood in formation, saluting one man. No captions, no sensational headlines, just the image and a simple note. Some salutes aren't given. They're earned. At first, people didn't understand what they were seeing. Then someone commented, "Who was the man they were saluting?" A second comment followed, "If it's who I think it is, we owe him more than we can ever say." Stories started trickling in. A blurry personnel file emerged. James Kellan, Air Command Reconnaissance Unit 9B, joined in 1968, vanished during Operation Emberlight in 1977, presumed dead. Found walking alone through enemy territory 5 days later, no weapon, no radio, bleeding, carrying the bodies of 2 fellow airmen, refused to speak of it, declined all medals. Some called him a ghost, others called him a guardian. At the local cafe, the same booth he always sat in had been left empty, not by request, but by instinct. Customers whispered in corners. The waitress who always served him left his usual coffee and eggs untouched on the table that morning. Across town, a reporter knocked on his door, hoping for an interview. The door never opened. The curtains never moved. But the following day, a small envelope was left at the reporter's office. Inside was a single photograph, 8 young men in flight suits, arms around each other, grinning. On the back, one handwritten line, "Don't ask what we did. Ask why we stayed silent." At the airbase, Commander Hill, pilot of Echo 1, sat in a debriefing room. He was reprimanded for deviating from the flight path. Regulations had been broken, but no one pushed too hard. Not after the footage went viral, not after the base commander received a call from someone in Washington with no name and no rank. Hill simply said, "We knew who he was." That was enough. In the weeks that followed, people began showing up at the old memorial, not for ceremonies or cameras, just to sit. Some left flowers, others old patches. A few, silence. One day, a former pilot placed a sealed envelope on the bench. Inside was a folded ribbon and a note. "You never stood for yourself. Let us do it for you." Back in town, the mayor quietly passed a motion to rename the east-facing edge of the memorial field. It became the Kellan Line. No speech was made, no ribbon was cut. A simple plaque was placed beneath the bench. For the man who walked alone, so others wouldn't have to. Children who once laughed at his hat now lowered their voices when passing him on the street. Their parents taught them to nod respectfully. He never acknowledged them, not out of pride, but because acknowledgement was never what he wanted. He continued his walks, still silent, still observing. Then one morning, the airspace over the town buzzed again. But there was no scheduled flyover. 4 jets, sleek and fast, passed low in silent formation, one wing slightly dipped. No one had summoned them. No one had made a request. A few minutes later, an unmarked car parked near the memorial. 2 officers stepped out, one in full dress uniform, the other younger, wearing civilian clothes. They approached James, who was sitting quietly, cap pulled low. The officer spoke gently. "Mr. Kellan, we'd like to ask your permission." He looked up slowly. "For what?" "To tell your story, officially, as part of the Legacy Project." James shook his head. "Not mine," he said. "Ours." The younger officer, who hadn't spoken, reached into his coat and pulled out a folded cloth. Slowly, carefully, he opened it. Inside was a single worn flight patch, the same triangle with the winged blade. "This was my father's," he said. "He flew under you. Operation Emberlight." Kellan's fingers brushed the patch, then rested still. "I never forgot him," he said. "Not for one day." Neither man spoke again. A few minutes later, they left. But something had changed. That evening, the diner booth was no longer empty. Kellan sat across from the young officer, 2 coffees between them. They didn't speak much, but they didn't need to. The town noticed. Word spread. He's not alone anymore. At the airfield, young cadets began requesting records about the Emberlight unit. Most of the files remained sealed, but a training video was quietly added to the Academy archive. No narration, just images, aerial maps, mission logs, photos of men who never came home. At the end, one sentence appeared in white text on a black screen. "They never asked for recognition, but we will never forget them." And beneath it, a name, James Kellan. Back in town, James received a package, no return address. Inside was a model aircraft, hand-carved, unpainted. Its tail number matched one lost during Emberlight. No note. But on the wing, scratched with care, were 5 words. "For the last man standing." James placed it on his shelf beside the photo of his unit. He didn't smile, but he didn't look away either. One day, he didn't come to the diner. The waitress waited. The bench at the memorial remained empty. People noticed. No one rang the bell. No one made an announcement. But over the next week, visitors placed 13 hats on the bench, 1 for each man in the photo, 1 extra for the man who walked out of silence, only to disappear again. No funeral was held. No obituary was published. But every year on the same date, 4 jets pass over the Kellan line. They dip their wings once, then vanish into the sky. Because some legacies aren't written in medals or speeches. They live in silence. They live in memory. They live in the space between salutes. And they begin with a man who once wore a faded cap that no one respected until they understood what it meant.